Hey, what's up everybody? We are back again, and today we are once again going to be talking about my former favorite rapper of all time, Ski Mask, the Slump God. Now right off the bat, this is going to be a bit of a different type of video than what you guys are used to. I'm not really going to go into a full-on deep dive of his life, as I've already done that before in this video called The Rise and Fall of Ski Mask. That video goes a lot more in depth into his early life, his rise to fame, and then eventual stagnation. And while I personally think it's a pretty good introduction to Ski Mask in his career for people who might not know that much about him, at the time it was pretty controversial. And I believe the reason behind that is because I don't really share the popular opinion about Ski Mask in the modern day, and because of that and the way that the video was framed, I wasn't really fully able to explain my own perspective on him. And since then I've had constant questions from people asking me how I feel about Ski Mask in the modern day, how I felt about his sophomore album, and if I changed my opinion at all after hearing it. And with Ski Mask recently seeming more relevant than he's been in the better part of half a decade, and because of that I think now is a better time than ever to give my full opinion on his career, his modern antics, how I found him in the first place, how he eventually became my favorite rapper ever, and his eventual stagnation. So why don't we start from the beginning? So just like many other people who were teenagers during the SoundCloud wave, I would come across Ski Mask the Slump God through his connection to XXXTentacion, although admittedly I definitely was a very latecomer to his career, as I would only really discover him after X passed away. And the reasoning behind that is because I was never really a big fan of X overall. I definitely knew who he was, I had heard a couple songs from time to time, but for the most part I never really clicked with his music. I mean, of course I listened to the most generic songs that he had, like Sad, Moonlight, and I Don't Speak Spanish, and I definitely fucked with them, but I would never really say that I was a hardcore X fan at any point during my life. However, I did know a lot of people who were big fans of him, and because of that, when he ended up passing away in mid-2018, I was able to see firsthand just how much it affected everybody who looked up to him. In fact, I actually remember one girl that I knew at the time actually being at her senior prom the night that he passed away, and she was so upset about it that she actually ended up leaving, which is pretty insane, but it goes to show just how deeply connected people were to X at the time. And of course, when you see everybody around you buying into the hype of a certain artist, it's gonna make you wonder what exactly makes this guy so special. So I would start digging into his older music and seeing if there was anything that really clicked with me, although admittedly I wasn't a very big fan of most of his screaming music, which I know sounds kind of crazy coming from me because I mostly cover trap metal, but the way that X would kind of strain his voice never really clicked. However, all of that would change one day when I was hanging out with a couple of my buddies and they would end up putting on an X playlist with a bunch of his old hits, and while once again none of it was really clicking with me, the second that I heard George W. Bush on that pussy,
George W. Bush right on her pussy, yeah,
I was immediately intrigued. However, it wasn't X's part of the song that really caught my attention, it was the other artist on the track. So I would immediately go to my buddy and ask who exactly it was, and he would tell me it's Ski Mask the Slump God, and I would think, that's a really stupid fucking name. But despite that, I went home that night and started looking into him. I would listen to all of the old mixtapes, I would find a bunch of his old tracks on SoundCloud, and before long, I was a massive fan of him. And of course, after I became a fan of the music, I would start looking at music videos, find all the Lyrical Lemonade ones, get to see the entire aesthetic that he was running with at the time, which to me was completely unique and cool. Although admittedly, he was basically doing what everybody else in Florida was doing at the time, but despite that, I hadn't really dived that deep into the culture yet. So to me, Ski Mask felt like a once-in-a-lifetime artist, and after Stokely came out and absolutely everybody in my high school started listening to it, I mean I'm talking jocks, nerds, cheerleaders, whatever you want to say, everybody was rocking with that album. And while in retrospect I know a lot of that came from the fact that X had recently passed away, and most people were really only checking it out because they were fans of X and not so much of Ski, but despite that I wasn't aware of that at the time, and I just thought it was really cool that so many people were finally listening to Ski Mask. And on top of that, the album was really good as well. Like I would say it's probably in the top 50 greatest SoundCloud projects of all time, maybe top 25, but that's debatable. And from here on, it seemed like Ski was only going to get bigger and bigger. I mean, I know he was definitely dealing with a lot of grief from losing his best friend, but at the same time, he had basically spent all of 2018 trying to break free of the shadow of XXXTentacion, and while now, admittedly, his shadow was bigger than ever, I definitely felt like he would be able to balance showing respects to his fallen friend while also taking his own path and growing as an artist, and once 2019 rolled around, it seemed like that's exactly what was going to happen. He ended up going on this massive tour, he would tease a brand new project that was set to release sometime in early 2019, there was also supposed to be a collab project between him and Juice WRLD, which would have went crazy. However, this is when we really started to see a lot of false promises from Ski Mask. He would go on to say that there was going to be a project dropping next month, but then the month would pass and he wouldn't say anything about it. He would then go on to drop a single saying that it was meant to be a teaser for his sophomore album, which would definitely be out that year, although that never came to pass. However, it's not like we wouldn't get any music from Ski in 2019 because he would appear on several features off a DJ Schemes project called The Preseason, which of course was meant to be a teaser for his debut album, which was called Family. And one of the tracks off of The Preseason, called How You Feel, featuring Danny Towers and Lil Yachty, would go on to become a pretty big meme with the line, "How you feel?" I'm not going to play that because Danny Towers is going to copyright my entire fucking channel again. And while admittedly that was another pretty big moment for Ski, it kind of felt like he was becoming a bit of a joke. Or if not a joke, kind of a caricature of what he used to be. Because if you take a look at Ski Mask's evolution between 2015 to 2018, you can definitely see a lot of growth. I mean, don't get me wrong, he never really changed up the flow all that much, but considering it's such a unique flow, he never really had to. However, you could constantly see him changing his aesthetic, changing his style of music, his beat choices, and while of course he was always kind of a goofy rapper that wasn't afraid to play into the funny side of his personality, it never felt like Ski Mask was a full-blown meme rapper until around 2019. Because during this time, the little bit of music that he was dropping kind of felt like a watered-down version of what he put out in 2018. And don't get me wrong, it was still good, it was still catchy, and it still felt like Ski Mask, but I think a lot of the fans at the time, me included, really wanted to see him continue to evolve and maybe start to switch it up a bit. And I'm not even really talking about the style of music that he was making, it was more so the fact that he seemed to be constantly stuck on Stokely throughout the year 2019. He would continue to put out music videos for it, which I understand, you put a lot of work into the project, you want to see it do as well as it can. But by the time that 2020 rolled around, it was definitely time to let it go. Because you really gotta realize how fast the internet moves. Something can be the biggest thing in the world one week, and then the next, everybody's completely moved on. And I would say about every 3 years, a completely new base of people come into the underground and start listening to different things, and if you can't consistently capture a new audience, eventually you're gonna fade away. And the weirdest part about this entire hiatus is the fact that Ski Mask seemed to understand that. I mean, he was constantly dropping music from the years of 2015 to 2018 with 3 whole projects in 2018 alone. And then out of nowhere, he completely stopped. And don't get me wrong, I understand that he ended up going on a big tour and there probably wasn't a whole lot of time to get in the studio and really make something magical, but you could have put out a little mixtape at the very least. And while a lot of people will blame this hiatus on the passing of X and Juice, which definitely did play a hand into it, you gotta keep in mind he was already starting to step back from music before Juice even passed away. And while of course losing both of them back to back definitely added on to the overall stress that he was probably going through at the time, it seems like there was other issues that were plaguing him at the time. And I think a lot of that, as much as people don't want to admit it, probably came down to the fact that he was now rich, he was now popular, he was now beloved, and he had the legacy of Juice and X to fall back on any time that he felt like he was slipping. And this is really what happened to a lot of SoundCloud rappers, or rappers in general really. They're very hungry when they're trying to get to the money, but after they're already rich, they feel like they can simply coast through, and honestly, that's what Ski was allowed to do for years and years. In 2020, he would put out one Lyrical Lemonade video for a track called Burn the Hoods, which apparently was going to be the lead single off of his sophomore album, although that never ended up materializing. In 2021, he would promise 3 new mixtapes with the album on the way as well, although only one of them would end up coming out, which was called Sin City. And you know what? I'm not gonna lie, I think this project was really good. I felt like this was finally the evolution of Ski that I wanted to see, because while yes, he was still definitely dabbling with that old flow, he was putting enough of a spin on it to make it sound unique and different, and because of that, I think a lot of fans really enjoyed the project. And for the first time in 3 years, it finally felt like Ski Mask was really starting to evolve again. Although, unfortunately, immediately after that, he would once again stop dropping music, and unfortunately, we wouldn't really see him again until 2022. And unfortunately, I truly do feel like this was the moment that a lot of his OG fans ended up hopping off of the hype train. I mean, people really gave him a lot of grace, probably more grace and patience than any other artist has ever had. They knew that he was grieving, they knew that he was going through a lot, but all of the false promises were starting to get to people. He was still promising that sophomore album that would be generational and would completely change his persona online and make everybody fall in love with his music again. But at this point in 2022, it had already been 4 long years since he was really in his prime. And this is really where you would start to see the birth of a new ski mask, which I'll call nostalgia ski mask. Because after this point, it wasn't really about evolving anymore. It wasn't about making new bangers that would get people back on board. It was simply about reminding people of the good times. Now, this isn't an issue that only ski mask goes through, as a lot of SoundCloud rappers seem to be in a very similar box. I mean, you got people like Lil Uzi who tried to do something new and different only to piss off all of his fans, leading him to once again go back to the purple dreads and try to recapture that old magic from 2016, which I'm sorry to tell you guys, but that moment is gone. I know a lot of people really want to go back to that era of music, as after all, everything felt so fun, so carefree, and it felt like every other month we had a new banger coming out from a brand new artist that nobody had ever heard of before. And while admittedly things did get a lot worse after 2020 when it comes to mainstream music, you also got to keep in mind a big reason why you remember that era so fondly is because you were a teenager. You can pretty well talk to anybody in your life right now and ask them what their favorite type of music is, and they're most likely going to tell you a band or rapper or artist that they listened to when they were a teenager. It's not that the music was so much better back then, although it kind of was. It's more so where you were, how you felt, the lack of responsibility that you probably had at the time. It creates this feeling of nostalgia that no other type of music is ever going to be able to capture in your life. And that's not to say that you're never going to have music that you're going to be attached to in the future. If you continue to evolve as a person and do different things and form different memories, there's probably going to be a good chunk of music that you listen to in your 20s that's going to feel as nostalgic by the time that you're 40 as your teenage music feels to you right now. However, that's the issue nowadays. A lot of people never really move on. They continue to talk about the good times when they were teenagers. They never try anything new, anything different or experimental that comes out. They completely reject it. And then they project all of these insecurities onto their favorite artists, saying, Trippy, you're different now. You're making different types of music. And because of that, you're no longer the artist that I fell in love with. Uzi, when you were back in 2016 with the purple dreads, you were in your prime. What's wrong with you? Get back to that. But the thing is that no matter what type of music they make, no matter how many sequels they make to your favorite projects or favorite songs, they're never gonna be able to recapture that magic. So they should be allowed to experiment and try something different. And while many of these artists have tried to do something different and unique, Ski Mask didn't really seem all that interested in doing the same. And he would continue to nostalgia bait for the following years. He ended up dropping another music video on Lyrical Lemonade for a track called Alien, with him teasing that he was going to drop a Catch Me Outside Part 2 sometime that year, which never came to pass. And then after that, he basically continued to do the same thing for the following years. He would continue to perform at big venues like Summer Smash and Rolling Loud. He ended up appearing on the Lyrical Lemonade album on a couple different songs, all giving him the perception that he was still a massive artist while not really being musically relevant. And as time went on, it started to feel more and more like Ski Mask really didn't have his own audience anymore, and instead he was basically a tribute act to people like Juice and X, with most of their audiences looking at him as a stand-in for the two of them instead of his own independent artist. And because of that, he wasn't really building his own legacy anymore. Instead, he was simply a part of theirs, which is probably perfectly fine if you're a massive fan of those two artists, which, don't get me wrong, I was a pretty big fan of Juice back in high school, but I always liked Ski Mask more. I always felt like he was a more talented artist than the two of them, and it really felt like he should be at the top of the rap game. And while I know nowadays so many people look at him as X's goofy friend who was always kind of a meme rapper, I promise you back in 2018 he wasn't that. And I think if he tried hard enough, he really could have rose to the top. But unfortunately, he got comfortable, he got stagnant, and well, here we are now. But to be honest with you, I wasn't really mad at Ski for doing this. I mean, it kind of sucks that he never ended up panning out to be the artist that I thought he could, but I'm still happy that he was able to maintain some form of relevancy. I mean, there's many other artists from that wave who fell off the face of the planet, so being able to maintain any sort of relevancy, even if it's only because you used to be friends with a bunch of famous people, is still better than nothing. And at this point, I fully realized that Ski Mask had put himself in a box, and that's probably where he was going to stay for the foreseeable future. I never thought the album was actually going to drop, as after all, he had been teasing it for the better part of half a decade, so there was no way he was ever going to put it out. But, well, he surprised me. As not long after that first video came out, he would finally drop his sophomore album, which was called 11th Dimension. And after 5 long years of waiting for this project, it was finally here. Finally, the life-changing music that we had waited so long for was at our fingertips, and all we had to do was press play and have our entire minds altered forever. And when I did, well guys, I'm not gonna lie to you, I really wasn't all that impressed. And I know it comes across like I'm a hater. I mean, after all, I waited years and years to finally get new music from him, and now I'm gonna complain about it. But the reason behind that is because the album wasn't really any different than Stokely. I mean, you can definitely tell that he tried to experiment at least a little bit by singing on a couple of the tracks. Although I'm sorry to say, I really don't think that his voice is made to make that type of music. And besides those couple tracks where he tried to do something new, the entire project could basically be described by this meme right here.
I never thought I'd say this, but shouldn't we be learning something?
Say the line, Bart!
Water!
It no longer feels like Ski Mask is really himself anymore. It feels like he's trying to play the character of Ski Mask. He's trying to play into that energy that he had as a young man, but now that he's getting close to 30 years old, he no longer is the same person anymore. But because his fans won't let him evolve and move on and try to do different things, he has to continually make that same old style of music, and it doesn't feel genuine anymore. Back in the day, you could truly feel the energy in the studio when they record it. You could feel that he was fully into it, that he really enjoyed what he was doing, and music really seemed to be his passion. But on this project, he really sounds tired. And I mean, I can't blame him either. Imagine being almost 30 years old and having people tell you that the peak of your life was when you were around 21. I mean, that's gotta feel pretty crushing. It's like no matter what he does for the rest of his life, it's always gonna be overshadowed for the things that he did when he was younger. And because of that, why even try? You might as well continue to bait that nostalgia, get the old fans back on board time and time again, and play into it. And that's really what he's continued to do in 2025. In fact, right now he's probably more relevant than he's ever been in the past decade, all because he's been putting out old tracks that he has with X on Spotify. He ended up putting out Catch Me Outside Part 2 on Lyrical Lemonade, and I will admit it was a pretty good song, and while it definitely played heavily on the first one, as any sequel would, on its own, it's still a pretty good song. Although I would say that Ski can really only get away with this once. If he continues to do a Catch Me Outside Part 3 or a Take a Step Back Part 2, or just continually makes more and more sequels to his old songs, it's gonna get pretty tired and old. However, maybe I'm wrong about that, because right now in 2025, SoundCloud nostalgia is definitely at its peak. I mean, after all, the entire wave started around 2015, meaning we're coming up on an entire decade since Ski Mask started making music, which is kind of crazy to think about that he's been in the game for 10 years at this point. And for 5 of those years, he's basically been banking off of the fame that he gained in the first 5. And well, I guess for the next 10, he's probably going to continue to do the same thing. And I know this is a pretty common thing when it comes to any musical act. Eventually, they're going to start to bank on nostalgia as it brings in their old audience from back in the day. But it's only been 10 years. It's not like Ski Mask has been a rapper for 50 years and now he's starting to nostalgia bait. He spent just about as much of his career reminding people about how good his music was as he did actually making good music. Think about that. That's pretty crazy. And that leads me to wonder, in 2030, is he going to be doing the same thing? Like, guys, remember 2018, and then in 2040, he's going to be doing the same thing? Or is he going to be reminding people of 2025? Hey guys, remember when I made a bunch of sequels to all the music that I got famous for in 2018? Yeah, now I'm making more sequels. And I know it comes across like I'm tearing into the man. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think it's really cool that that he's putting all of those old songs on Spotify so an entirely new audience can listen to them. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing to remind people of why they liked you in the first place. But when you're doing it constantly, it gets really tiresome. And at this point, that's all that the SoundCloud wave really feels like. A bunch of emotionally stunted artists and fans who aren't willing to move on from 2016. I mean, how many times have we seen XXL share a clip of the cypher from back in the day? I mean, yeah, it was good, guys. It was fun, but it's been 10 fucking years. Can we move on? And just overall, I feel like this is a very toxic mentality to have when you're not willing to move on from your glory days and look for anything new. The world used to be good, now it's bad, and nothing will ever be the same. That's not the way that you should think. That's not the way that things are. I promise you, there's an entire world out there and many different types of music, experiences, and people that you're gonna come across that are gonna change your entire perception of life. And there's nothing wrong with looking back from time to time. I mean, if you're still listening to Ski Mask the Slump God's old tracks every single day, but you're living a very fulfilling life and you're doing new things at the same time, I wouldn't really say there's an issue with that. But if all you're doing is sitting in your room and thinking about the good old days back when you were in high school and the peak of the SoundCloud wave and how it made you feel and how everything was so much better back then, I would say that that's probably not the healthiest mindset. And I'm not even trying to shit on anybody either, because I definitely spent a pretty good chunk of my life feeling the same way, like music was all bullshit now and that the SoundCloud wave never should have came to an end because that's when music was peak. I mean, look at my entire channel. This is basically what I talk about day in and day out. And because of that, I can definitely understand where people are coming from. And I can also understand why Ski Mask the Slump God is deciding to do things the way that he is, but at the same time, I just feel like he has so much more potential. I mean, when it comes to people like DJ Scheme or Danny Towers, they don't really have any talent whatsoever, so of course they're going to try to attach themselves onto X as much as they can, but with somebody like Ski Mask, you don't need to do that. Even after all these years, even after all the inactivity, you're still able to get people on board with your movement. He actually ended up doing a promo show for the Lost Files, and the energy in that room clearly was very reminiscent of 2017, which goes to show that Ski still has it in him. And my hope is that he's going to take all that momentum that he has from the old music, get back into that same mindset that he had back in the day, and really make something special and show everybody that even after all these years, Ski Mask the Slump God is his own independent artist. And not only that, but he's one of the greatest to ever do it. So if he manages to pull that off, I definitely will be watching. And if not, well, I said my piece, and honestly, I wish the best for Ski Mask. He seems like a pretty good guy. I've never really heard anything all that bad about him. And because of that, he definitely deserves all of the success that he's had, and hopefully he'll continue to have more no matter what path he decides to take. And with that said, that's basically all I have to say about Ski Mask the Slump God in the modern day. However, before we close off, I do have one more point to make. Because over the past couple years, I've seen many videos made about artists who managed to escape the SoundCloud wave, or even worse, the 1985 effect, which I don't think is a real thing. I actually have an entire video about that if you want to watch it. But that's besides the point. What I'm really trying to say is that all of these videos will bring up people like Lil Uzi Vert, Trippie Redd, Ski Mask the Slump God, which, as I've described in this video, never really managed to escape that wave. As like I've said previously, they're constantly stuck in the past, but their fans not allowing them to move on. However, I do believe there is one artist who truly escaped the SoundCloud wave, and well, that's who I'm going to be talking about in my next video. So stay tuned for that. If you managed to make it to the end of this video without getting pissed off, leave a burger emoji to show me that you did. Definitely let me know what your opinions are on Ski Mask the Slump God. And if you're feeling really crazy, you can let me know what you think about OJ Simpson. I mean, why not? Let's get a conversation going, confuse a couple people. I think it'd be really funny if all of the comments were just talking about OJ Simpson and weren't even saying anything about Ski Mask the Slump God. I think a lot of people would be very confused by that. But whether or not you end up doing that, thank you guys so much for watching. Knife Gang, delete this gang. Thank you guys so much for 30k subscribers. If I'm still above that by the time that this video comes out, because I'm actually recording it before the Zilla Kami one. But either way, it's going to be back to back, working on a new documentary as well. So stay tuned for all of that. And with all that said, see you in the next one. Peace out. Bye. Ski Mask forever. Doot doot doot. Peace.